Hello. Welcome, everybody. Turn that off. Hello. Welcome to Entrepreneur School, where cameras are optional, but participation, wow, which has an extra syllable today. Participation is highly encouraged, and we are here to have a conversation, to have a very interactive style workshop. I'm very pleased to have a special guest today, coming to us from our nation's capital of Ottawa. All of a sudden, I'm like a game announcer. I'm like channeling that right now. So welcome to everyone who is here. Let us know in the chat. Actually, I see that half of you can't even hear me yet, but that's okay. I'm sure you'll catch up. Let us know in the chat where you are tuning in from and what your business is, so we get a little bit of a sense of everybody and who you all are, because we do love when Entrepreneur School can help connect entrepreneurs in different industries and different locations. People who you didn't know you even needed to meet might be here today on this call. So Stephanie is here to talk to us all about meetings, and that is not a boring topic, I promise you. We could probably have judged up the title of this workshop, but you're here, so I appreciate that. It's something that we all do multiple times a day, is have different meetings for different purposes, and really being able to unpack and strategize about it is what Stephanie is here to teach us. And she is super qualified for this as a lobbyist, a political lobbyist who gets approximately 25 minutes of someone powerful's time to make them think the way that is the way that she wants them to think for her clients. So Stephanie, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, tell us a little bit about your background, and jump on into your presentation. And hello to everybody.
That's great. I see in particular, there's somebody joining us from Florida, which makes Kelly very jealous because she's in Calgary, where we have snow happening in Canada right now. I'm just going to get things going here.
Yeah, it is winter. It's winter at last.
So as Kelly said, today we're going to be chatting about how to host meetings to meet your strategic objectives. And we're going to go through a few different things. So we're going to do introductions. We're going to talk about the winning formula for meetings. We're going to break down the components and go through them in detail. There's going to be a giveaway at the end. And we'll have a Q&A session, which will also be really important in terms of making sure we cover off particular scenarios that you may have in your business, or things that maybe I missed that you want to chat about. We'll review, and then we'll talk about how to stay connected. So introductions, I'm Stephanie Mitton. As Kelly mentioned, Kelly and I know each other. We used to work at the same consulting firm in the past, earlier on in our careers, which is how we know each other. And now we are both entrepreneurs. I own a company called Beacon North Strategies, which is a public affairs company. We do lobbying, sometimes known as government relations or advocacy, because lobbying can sometimes be seen as a dirty word, and so known as many things. I also do things like strategic communications and stakeholder relations. So those are some of the things that my business does. I'm a public affairs specialist ultimately, and I'm also a speaker and a podcaster and blogger. I have a community called Women Don't Do That. So if you're interested in hearing about women's stories, doing interesting things, you can check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. So that's a little bit about me. A fun fact about me is that one time when I was in university, I tried out to be in a Robbie Williams music video as a cheerleader. They were looking for cheerleaders, and I made it to the last round, but then I got cut. So I'm not famous. So I like to include this screen to talk about why should you care about what I have to say. And so this just includes some of the different political campaigns that I have been a part of. I'm really proud of the one with the picture about Canada putting $1.1 billion into new maternal child health funding. That was early in my career, and the first conversation with the organization that was lobbying for that was with me in the Prime Minister's office. So really kickstarting that conversation in Canada, then ultimately seeing that funding come about. So at the end of the day, I get paid to talk and to have meetings. And when I was young, I got told I talk too much, and now that's how I make money. So now it's funny instead of hurtful. So some of you already shared where you're from. And I'm also curious about what your job is and what your industry is. So if anybody wants to share that, I'd be curious to know as we break this down a little bit. I see
You're
we have
welcome
someone.
to use the chat or just even unmute
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. I see we have somebody from Compassion Canada that works in London.
Oh, Greg has raised his hand. Thank you for using the Zoom features, Greg.
You're welcome. Yeah. Hi, Kelly. How are you? And hi, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, yeah, my name is Greg. I'm a clinical therapist, and we've created a unique form of clinical therapy called LifeCraft Therapy, which is the company that I've founded. And it's a really interesting clinical model that combines many different powerful therapeutic tools, and we utilize them in a trance state, which makes them much more easy to gain traction with. And I'm venturing more and more from being a clinician into being an entrepreneur, as we find really powerful ways to give access to LifeCraft therapy to many people as we productize it in different niche ways. So that's really the underscore of my entrepreneurial journey lately.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Others, feel free to speak or to share in the chat what your job and industry is. See, Anita already put in the chat. She's from London, Ontario, and earlier she mentioned she's from Compassion Canada, which does international development. All right, well, we'll keep going, and people can feel free to add later if they would like. Oops. Okay. So how can I help you? What do you hope to get out of today's session? As Kelly said, we're going to talk about meetings, especially from the strategic side of things. We are going to, these skill sets and things that we're going to chat about are definitely things that you can use at internal meetings in your companies or with colleagues. But I think that the main focus would be for external audiences, although transferable. Oh, somebody's saying sharing what ancestral territory they're from and that they work in international relief and cooperation. Oh, hi, Laura. I've met Laura before. Nice to see you here. Thanks for coming. Oops. Okay, so I'd be happy to hear if there's any particular things around meetings, like why are you here today? Maybe your boss made you come. I kind of laugh, right? When we think about meetings, we think, oh, that's boring. But as Kelly said, on the strategic side, it will be very interesting. So feel free to add in the chat or to just unmute and let me know what you hope to get out of today's session so that I can try and cover that. And if I don't, that we can talk about it at the end of the Q&A. Laura's saying she'll keep her camera off because she's eating. That's fair.
I was hoping that you would address how we can have shorter meetings in particular.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Greg has also raised his hand.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, so I guess one thing, Stephanie, I'm curious to know about, or maybe just kind of gather collaterally from observing how you present is ethics in persuasion, and you know, I'm being a clinical therapist and clinical hypnotherapist. You know, I use neurolinguistic programming and hypnotic language all the time in the clinic, and so I'm exceptionally careful with how I use these tools in conversation with people in regular life, and so I'm always open to exploring, you know, what is, for me as a clinician, when I diagnose something, what is an ethical or reasonable amount of gentle persuasion
Mm,
when I'm speaking, and it's a form of lobbying in a way, right?
yeah,
Trying to get what's in their
yeah,
best interest,
it's
in the
an
best.
interesting question. As you're saying it, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting question to ask a lobbyist. I see
Right,
we have
yeah.
another person sharing in the chat, I think. I'm interested in creating space for various communication styles. Some are great at riffing quickly, while others need more time and making effective use of time. Okay, that's helpful. All right, well, we'll hopefully cover some of that, but we will have Q&A at the end. So if I haven't, like shorter meetings, Kelly, we can definitely talk about those things at the end as well. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the different steps. So the 4 different things that we're going to talk about today are prepare, approach, deliver, and practice. So first we're going to talk about preparing, and I'm going to pull up, oops. Now I'm going to, you have to forgive me with my technology skills here. I'm going to pull up a template, and Kelly can make sure that you get access to this later. And so we're going to talk about some of the preparation you can do as you prepare for a meeting and how that's going to help you reach your strategic objectives. One thing that I want to mention is potentially, depending on the type of work that you do, maybe you'll be preparing for the meetings. Maybe you're the person that's actually hosting the meetings. Like the different roles in the strategy that we're going to talk about may be held from different people. So we can talk about that. I would also say that in best case scenarios, you have time to prepare and you go through all the details and you're ready when you go in for the meeting. But we know that we don't have a lot of time, and sometimes it's not going to happen. And so even just taking 5 minutes before a meeting and thinking about these things can really be a game changer. And so at the very least, just spending a few minutes thinking about it is better than not doing it at all. Of course, if you hire somebody like me, I help do this for you. And so that's the benefit of working with someone like myself. I'm just going to see, there's somebody in the chat saying, oh yeah, we'll share them afterwards. Thank you, Kelly. Okay. So when we start with the objectives, we're thinking about types of things that are listed here. So what do you want to achieve in the meeting? What is the outcome you want? What would make your meeting successful? Why are you having the meeting to begin with? And you really want to think about just a few things. You'll see here that 3 is maybe ideal, definitely no more than 5. And also this might be the stage where as you're thinking about what you want to achieve that you realize this can actually just be an email. You don't need all this detail. Then we think about things like key messages, and we are going to go through an example afterwards as well to make it more real to the work that you're doing. Key messages should support your objectives. What do you want to make sure that you say in a meeting? So this is, if they only remember 3 things or 5 things, what do you want the takeaways to be? What do you want them to remember when the meeting's over? The context is really important. You want to be really realistic about the objectives and what you want to achieve in your meetings. And so you can't expect certain outcomes if the context just doesn't allow for it. So thinking about, what is happening for that person? What is happening for you? Did that company CEO just get fired? Like thinking about the context is really helpful. And making sure then that the objectives that you want to achieve are actually realistic. And what do you, your client, your boss, whether it's you or you're preparing someone else, need to know that could impact the meeting either during or afterwards. So for example, maybe right before the meeting, the government just shuffled the person that you're meeting with and they're not the minister anymore, right? Like that could happen in a meeting that maybe I would have, for instance, in my works. That really matters, that whoever I'm prepping the meeting for has that information. The next piece, and we're going to go into this in quite a bit more detail later on today, is the creation of an agenda. And this is actually where a lot of the strategy in the execution around meetings is actually going to happen for you. You can frame the meeting, what components need to be in to walk through the meeting. So, for example, you always need a welcome, you always need space to deliver your key messages. And you'll see this more as we get into an example. You want to time out the framing components of the meeting. You might think that you're going to talk about a bunch of stuff and then realize, oh, I only have 5 minutes to deliver my key messages. So maybe that's actually 2 or 3 things that I have time to say. You can practice framing and transitioning language to move the agenda along. And we're going to talk about this. And that's really where a lot of the strategy comes in. So practicing pivoting language to keep focused on your key messages is also really important, because there will be times where you might be down on a rabbit hole on some topic. You bring it back to your key messages. It can also be really helpful to think about who is going to talk about what points ahead of time. But keeping in mind, so this is like if there's a few of you in a meeting, right? But you do need to keep in mind that you do need to keep things flexible. And sometimes it doesn't make sense for someone to jump in. Sometimes an agenda needs to be or would benefit from being discussed with the other people that you were meeting with, right? So there are times where you're going to want to chat with the people that you're meeting with. Maybe there's some prep work they need to do or things you really want them to read. And so sometimes you will need to do that. Okay, we're now going to walk through an example about how you might put this into practice. And of course, you need to personalize this for your own needs and your own business. So I made up a scenario where we're meeting with Karen Smith. She's the VP of Public Affairs at TELUS. This is a made-up person who will turn into Kelly. My role is Stephanie Mitton, and I'm going to be the principal and founder of Mitton Speaker Management. So I manage speakers, try and teach them better tools for being a speaker, but also in this scenario, help them get speaking engagements. So this meeting that we're going to be having is to introduce Karen to Stephanie in speaker management, as Karen is looking for keynote coaching. So some of the objectives for this meeting that I would put are: develop a relationship with Karen Smith, introduce VP Smith to my company, explore Karen's interest in becoming a client, and also learn more about maybe some of the contacts that she could give me to share with future clients. So if those are my objectives, then my key messages need to reflect what I want to get out of the meeting. So key messages would be things like: Stephanie Mitton is a sought after expert in her field and has supported 5% of current Fortune 500 company CEOs to provide keynote speeches to hundreds of thousands of potential customers. That we're a boutique firm where they can get hands-on experience from senior coaches, and that, as clients have said to us, more support for their money. I would also talk about our clear track record for success, for instance. So these are all different things that are going to back up those objectives. Mitton Speaker Management would like to work with Karen to increase her personal brand through thought leadership globally, which in turn will increase the revenue and the customers for TELUS. So context that's really important to know is that Karen is in line to become the CEO of TELUS. And so, of course, I want them as a client, because having the CEO of TELUS would be awesome. Karen has worked with coaching experts in the past, but her revenue has not increased. And so that's where the points about how I have proof points about clients reaching and increasing their speaking opportunities is really important. And then you'll see I've drafted out a bit of an agenda. And as Kelly knows, it's 30 minutes long. I guess maybe I'll pause here and talk about that for a second, Kelly. In the work that I do, it's actually very rare that I would get to meet with somebody for more than 30 minutes. Almost all of our meetings are 30 minutes, whether you're meeting with the Prime Minister, meeting with one of his staff, meeting a minister, meeting a senator, you won't get longer than 30 minutes. There is the odd meeting at the civil service level, which sometimes I do meet with, where you'll get an hour. And often I find I don't need the time. If you're having a discussion where you're solving something together, you're developing something together, you really want to dive in on a topic and have a discussion, then I think that's where a longer term, like a meeting, is really helpful. But if you're really just doing introductions, or there's just a few objectives you want to share back and forth with each other, you can successfully do that within 30 minutes. So in this meeting, we would want to have some small talk, not too much, and that's where reading body language can become really helpful, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Of course, introductions about who you are and more about your company, reasons for the meeting, why you wanted to meet with them maybe, and walk them through the agenda. You can also gather information about her priorities, so that when I speak more about my company and what I do, that I can hear more from Karen to frame that language, and then again have her react to what I've shared, because I want to know what she thinks about that. Is she likely to work with us? That kind of a thing. And then for closing remarks, you want to reinforce any specific messages, review next steps, thank them for their time. So that's kind of the basic format that I would use. If I was meeting with a different type of audience, so for instance, in my work that I do as a lobbyist, the second line about intelligence I would remove, and I would first deliver some of my key messages and then try and gather their reaction and their priorities. So you just set out the agenda for really what you want to achieve. We are going to go through some of this in a little bit more detail later, but I will pause and see if, as of yet, anybody has any questions and comments.
Do you think that there's an expectation that's already set, in particular in the line of work that you do, where it's kind of like a little bit more like, let's just get to the point? And how do we then create those same expectations in a different application of a meeting in order to maintain a shorter and more efficient use of time?
Right. I mean, maybe to a certain extent, Kelly, but I think it really depends on the personality of the person that you're meeting with. And I think that's part of reading body language, even as you start the meeting. But if you book the meeting ahead of time for 30 minutes, then that piece in somewhat is already covered off, right? I think too, it's quite reasonable. Like, there are times where 30 minutes does feel kind of tight, so maybe 45 depending on the meeting, but I would say consistently your meetings definitely don't need to be an hour long, for sure. Anybody else, questions or comments so far?
I wonder if this is going to lead into a particular strategy with follow-up as well.
Yeah, so I don't dive into the follow-up too much, but we can definitely talk about that in the Q&A, because I, of course, have opinions on it.
Love it.
Okay. Just checking my notes here for a second. Okay. So I think, Kelly, what we'll do now is I'd like to kind of, actually, no, I'm going to do a different piece first, and then we'll come back, and then we'll come back to that piece in a second. Okay. So that is what we just went through, is about doing some of the preparatory work. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the approaches and some to-dos and tips. And I also have a lot of these tips in a PDF giveaway that Kelly will share afterwards as well, or can throw in the chat. It's the website one, Kelly. So some tips are to structure your meeting like a conversation. I will pause for a second and say that when we go through tips, they seem like a lot. And what I would recommend is if you pick one or two to work on at a time, then maybe you pick one and you have a few meetings and you practice, and then you get good at that one, and then you add another one. If you try and add all of these at once, it will become too much. Because one of the benefits I feel like for me from doing a lot of these for so many years is that as much as what I'm preparing ahead of time, what I'm delivering is somewhat scripted and structured, I don't deliver it like it is. The person does not know that I have done all of that, or that and does not feel like I have, or I would not be good at my job. And so that takes time and it takes practice. So again, so structure your meetings like a conversation. Try to keep them conversational rather than transactional. Turn off any distractions. That's something that will obviously help you. Ensure you leave enough time to hear from attendees in the meeting. I think this is really important, and depending on what your objectives are is probably one of the most important things about meetings. Is at the end of the day, what's really beneficial is to hear from them, especially if you're gathering some kind of information. Yes, you want to share some stuff, but at the end of the day, in my work, hearing other people's feedback on that or hearing what's important to them will actually help me longer term achieve what I want to achieve, which is working with them to have them do something that I want them to do. Leave a positive impression. So much about meetings, networking is about relationships and leaving a positive impression. If all they remember is that they had a positive meeting with you and they like you as a person, that's absolutely huge. Don't use jargon. So depending on what your industry is and the language maybe you use within your company, you need to make sure that you're not using that with external stakeholders, because you'll lose them. They won't know what you're talking about. And so try and use language like if you were talking to your best friend's mom and you were explaining what you did for work, that's the type of language that you should be using when you're meeting with external stakeholders, unless you're meeting with like a technical expert who already understands that language. Keep meetings to their scheduled times. I think this is so important, especially I know for my industry, I always make sure I end on time because I want that person to meet me in the future. So if they say they only have 30 minutes, I'm going to keep it to 30 minutes. I do think there's an asterisk there, which is that if you're meeting with somebody where it's a really, really important meeting to you, you could book some extra time afterwards to give yourself some buffer in case that person wants to stay on longer and go over. But to do that, I would either allow the other person to tell me that they want to stay longer, or you can signal check and say, we're having a really great discussion. Do you want to keep chatting about this, or do you need to end at 3:30 or whatever? So generally, to ensure you get a future meeting, I would keep it to your scheduled time. Stay focused on your key messages and practice pivot lines to help you return to those messages. And we're going to talk about that today too. Don't confuse attendees by being too detailed too. If you go down into the weeds on something and you feel like someone's glazing over or they're looking at their phone, you need to start talking more high level again. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's something we don't do enough. If you really want to know something, you can just ask. You can ask fairly direct and pointed questions in a polite way. I think that's something about my advocacy approach that's maybe a little bit different, and that works really well for me. I see there's a comment. Oh yes, thanks, Kelly. Oops, now I've gone back. Okay. What else do we have here? We have speak with authority and integrity. You know what you're talking about. You know what you want to get across. And I think a key thing here is if they ask you something and you don't know the answer, it's completely appropriate to say something like, I'm not sure, let me look into that and get back to you. It will never benefit you to just make something up or say something you're not sure about, and they'll respect you more for that. I have a puppy here. As I mentioned earlier, building a relationship is really important. Hey. And that piece about, it's really about them, and that comes back to wanting to make sure that you hear from them. It depends what your objectives are, but in so much of my work, it's really about the other person and making sure that I hear from them and have a positive relationship with them. Some small talk is good, maybe not too much. And again, that's where you can read body language. I've met people that kind of love to chit chat at the beginning and then like to dive into things. And then I've also meet with people who are very serious policy advisors and don't like to waste their time, and they just want to get to the point. And in that case, you better just get to your points. So those are some tips. I'm just going to pause there before we move on to the next thing and see if anybody has any questions or comments or things they want to add.
I think you're really say in an underlying way saying this, but you're in charge of the meeting. Like,
yes,
just be in charge of the meeting rather, because sometimes I find accidentally letting somebody else take charge of the meeting, and then it goes just completely in a different direction, and it's hard to kind of get it back.
Corey?
I think one of the things also that I'm interested in, the reason why I said at the beginning, I'm interested in like different communication styles, is that I'm often involved in meetings that have people from multiple different organizations there, and like setting these things beforehand is so important. I love the thing about pivot lines, because like you have to be able to like do those things and be on the same page about it. So
yeah, a lot of what you'd be doing sometimes is herding cats. So it's like, how do you do that in a polite way? Absolutely. Okay. So next we're going to chat about the delivery piece. So this is really where we bring the two pieces together that we've already talked about, preparing and approach. And we're going to talk about some of that framing language. And so this is where I talk about how you really can walk people through an entire meeting by using some of this language and taking them where you want to go. And this is the type of thing that over time you would want to practice. So you could say things like, these are just some examples. Why don't I walk us through the agenda and then we can jump in? Asking questions, does that work for you? I would love to hear your thoughts on what I've shared. And then we can turn to what your priorities are for the next quarter. So you're kind of telling them like, this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to do next, and leading them where you want them to go. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we sign off, I want to add this. As we sign off, I want to share this. So you're using some framing language to walk through the entire meeting. And we are going to go through an example of that will help put it in better perspective. And then Laura, to your point about the pivoting language, they're kind of related, right? But how do you get things back on to the key messages? So that's an interesting question. Let me get back to you about that. What I want to draw your attention to is this. An interesting point, but research shows this. I know for me, sometimes I meet with people and what they're saying isn't even accurate or proper data, right? So sometimes there's a polite way to kind of make that transition. And you'll see, like, whether you call it framing language, bridging language, pivoting language, you can see lots of examples online in media relations training is really, some of that language that they teach you, you can just use in regular old meetings as well. You could say things like, I think the three main things to focus are on X. Maybe they're saying something and it's really getting you off topic. I've heard that concern, but what our customers say is more important is this. So, if you're in sales and maybe people are unhappy with your product or something, you can talk about some of that. I'll look into that. Something else to consider is this. So you don't just end on the I don't know piece. So those are some of the examples of the type of language that you can use and practice, and over time that gets easier. And I think that is the piece that really allows you to walk seamlessly through your agenda and really lead the person where you want to go in that meeting. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. So for practice, we already talked a lot about how valuable it is to practice this and to not get overwhelmed by doing too much. I want to look at the example that was drafted out and try to walk you, Kelly, through the agenda a bit as we practice what this could potentially look like in person. And then we can chat about that afterwards. Okay, ready, Kelly?
Yeah, should I change my screen name to Karen?
Yeah, Karen, yeah. Hi, Karen, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thanks, I'm glad you're here.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I know this period is a really busy time for you folks at TELUS.
Yes, I don't know whether I'm coming or going right now.
I can relate to that. I thought today we could do some introductions and talk a little bit about our agenda. I'd really like to hear some of the things that you've been thinking about in terms of your speaking, and I can share a little bit about how I think I can help you, and we can discuss that a bit and then close things off. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Great. Well, as you already know, I'm Stephanie Mitton, and I've worked with a number of Fortune 500 companies. I'm really excited to meet with you today. I worked a few years ago with your previous CEO, and so it's great to be chatting with you again today. We've already gone through the agenda, and I know that you're looking to have somebody take your speaking to the next level. And can you tell me a little bit more about what you're hoping to get out of your speaking? And then I can talk more about how I can help you.
Yes, so I really enjoy speaking. I find it's one of the most effective ways to reach more people at a time with our messages. Okay, pause. Who am I speaking to? Like,
You're speaking to me.
Yeah, but when she goes speaking, who's she speaking to? Like
your
customers,
Oh,
stakeholders?
she wants to be a bigger thought leader in her industry.
Okay, yeah. You know what? I'll be honest with you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
You know, as a woman in leadership, it's really important to me to be able to be a mentor, be able to be a role model, be able to sort of break through that glass ceiling and inspire other people, other women into taking on roles like this, and to be able to pair speaking about the actual work that we do here at TELUS alongside the journey of becoming a woman in leadership. That's what I really want to be able to get out as a message. And it's an important thing for me to think about my legacy in this field and my career and all of that wrapping up. And that's really where I'd like to take this.
Well, Karen, that's really wonderful to hear. I think that's so important and something we need to see more female leaders really doing, and certainly something we can support you with. We can chat about it another time, but we also have a podcast at my company, which is the audience is young women from 25 to 35. And I think it would be great to have you on. The listenership is 10,000 people a month. And I think it would be really great for them to hear your voice. So we can chat about that afterwards as well. I want to talk about how we can support your efforts. I think one thing that's really important for you to know is that you get hands-on experience from a senior person when you work with us. You either get somebody like me who's been in the industry for 20 years or somebody of equivalent level. And that is something that you will see differently than when you work with other firms. And also, that we commit to increasing your speaking revenue by 50% in 6 months. We've been in business for 20 years, and we have never had to, give the next couple months free, which is our guarantee. And I love hearing about how you want to talk about your branding and looking at increasing your thought leadership around that as you continue to grow in your career. We have a woman who works with us who really specializes in that work and has been able to get women at some pretty big speaking engagements internationally. And so that's something we can also include in our follow-up. I'd love to hear any feedback you have before we close things off today.
Yeah, so my time is somewhat limited. So in terms of actually getting out and speaking, I don't want to be on the road 3 weeks a month. I would really look to you for recommendations on, the top stages to be on, the top events to be part of, and to really give some strong consideration and recommend and advice and counsel around what's going to be the most effective. And obviously also be able to, I'd like to be able to review the proposal for speaker fees and what's all included and everything, and evaluate all of the scenarios individually, but in a nice, compact way.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe what I can do as I pull the proposals together, I can add some of those details. I'll keep it short, given your feedback. That's really helpful. And I can give you a bit of a menu of options in terms of how we can support you, so that, maybe a mid-level range that keeps you maybe not as busy, but gives you some significant exposure. And then if you decide that you would like to do more, I can share that option with you as well. So for next steps, I'll pull that together for you, and I can prepare that for you by the end of the week. Does that work for you?
Sounds great.
Okay, thanks so much, Karen. I will follow up with that, and I'll also send you the details of the podcast.
Excellent. Yes, your podcast sounds wonderful.
Great. Okay, thank you so much.
End scene. Okay.
End scene. Okay.
We're done acting now, everybody.
We're done acting now. I just wanted to check the comments here.
Oh, sorry.
Part is adding. That's a really great point. Thank you. It would be great to drill into the net. Yes. Yeah. Can the speakers throw to the main screen? Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Does anybody have any questions, comments, feedback from seeing, some of my strategy anyways, play out verbally? Questions about maybe how to apply that to your own work or anything like that?
I love that example. Actually, it was just a really nicely flowing sales conversation.
Yeah. And I think, as I said before, the more that you practice it, it will feel less. Was pivoty example, Brad saying? Less forced or something, right? I think that's one of the things that I think about often in my work is strong networking, interpersonal skills are really important. And I think genuinely really wanting to work, to know more about people and have an interest, if you can find that within yourself, will really make a difference in the work that you do. For me, it comes very naturally. And I know from meeting with stakeholders that that's something that definitely stands out and does make a difference. Just give me 1 sec. My daughter's just going to grab the puppy. Hold on.
Sounds good. I think I could have used your example in the chat yesterday, Brad. At a meeting that went, I let go, and it went for over 2 hours and 15 minutes. Okay, sorry, Steph, I muted you.
There we go. Okay. We've done a bit of the practice, and as I shared earlier, Kelly has shared like that giveaway, which really pulls together a lot of the tips that you can use as you're, walking this journey of figuring out how to make your meetings more strategic. It's also a way that you can join my mailing list. So I am going to be doing more workshops like this on probably mentorship, networking, other ones related to meetings. As Kelly said, there's, how do you get the meeting in the first place, and what's the follow-up that you can do? And those are things that that I will be looking at doing in the future as well. So I'd love to have you connect with me that way as well. Oops. So that document, which Kelly had put in the link, is 10 tips to make your next meeting a success. And that's the one that you can access. We're going to jump into the Q&A, and then we'll do a quick review, and I'll talk about how we can stay in touch. So shut the door, please, Renee. So let me know what questions you have, things we didn't cover that you want to cover. Greg, is there anything about the ethics of persuasion piece that you mentioned earlier that you wanted to discuss while we have some time together?
Sure. Yeah, I maybe just beginning open-ended. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on your approach to that. I don't know if I'm the only one, but from the outside looking in, it seems like politics has become a bit of a ruthless place lately, and I can imagine there are probably some blurred lines around the ethics of lobbying and advocacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of what you see probably in politics and is in the news, or like clips from Question Period, and those parts are fairly fantastical, if that's a word. Like they seem very grandiose and kind of mean to each other, but like they're not like that in person, or kind of even when they see each other on the street and they talk to each other, politicians have much different relationships than what they exhibit professionally or publicly, which is really unfortunate, but I think is the reality. I think for myself, it's really important that a lot of organizations that I work with are working off of like factual data, work that they're doing, data they've gathered about the work that they do. And so that's really helpful because you can feel like you have integrity when you're speaking to facts. And I think that definitely helps in terms of, okay, no, I know, Renee, thank you. I'll talk to you later. Thank you. So I think that really helps because you know that you're speaking with integrity. Personally, there's probably some industries that I maybe wouldn't take on as clients either. And owning my own business, I can make those decisions. Other firms that I've worked with had some pretty good principles around that too, where they wouldn't work with competing industries. So if they have a health practice, for instance, they wouldn't take on a company that sells cigarettes, let's say, or don't do competing industries. And so some principles like that definitely help as well. The other thing I would share, especially for people maybe coming from different countries, is that Canada has some pretty significant lobbying laws. There are ways around them to a certain extent, but for the most part, they're very stringent. Corporations can't donate money to political parties like they used to in Canada or like you can in the United States. And so it's pretty hard to buy a politician's votes when as an individual, you can't give, it's over $1,000, but just barely, right? Where in the past you could have given 3 million. And so that has really changed the game for the lobbying landscape in Canada. So that's a bit of a snapshot on that side. Any other specific questions on that, Greg, or anybody else on thoughts around what we've chatted about today?
Yeah, I have one more
Okay.
for you, Steph. So,
Yeah.
From my perspective, understanding how how subjective communication is. And, we all know we make decisions emotionally and then we justify them logically, right? And we're all human beings, even when we're talking about facts that are mutually understood. It's been my experience that the way that we converse, the way that we integrate data and information is so influenced by the way our unconscious mind is assigning meaning to things and the information through. And so there are tools available to us that can be very powerful in conversation. And so my question is, do you think that there's a market for teaching these skills to people who are in positions to move the needle in our government and in our social systems? Do you think there's a demand or a market for teaching people how to really clearly articulate something that they feel passionate about in a way that's ethical but very clear and that communicates with someone on their map?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think part of the reason I used the speaking example is because I do have a podcast, and I recently had a woman on who does speaker management, and part of what she does is help people when they do speaking engagements have very clear messages. So I absolutely do. I think sometimes it's probably a challenge to explain to people that that's what they need, like that piece, that communications piece of why they need your service may be challenging. But I definitely think that that there is a benefit to that. Where you may find more interest, Greg, is maybe less on the government voices in particular, because they have staff with histories like mine that work for them that probably think they know everything. Where you may find more benefit is to external audiences who really want to have a clear message. It's for those maybe speaking to government, where you may find a pickup more for some of those messages. Questions or comments from others? I'm pausing because I know it can also take a while if somebody is putting something in the chat. Kelly, is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to discuss today?
No, I think you exemplified your strategy of being very to the point and clear, and as a result has made this workshop even shorter than it even needed to be. So that's great.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you all how to be in touch with me. And just wrapping up, we've already covered preparing, approach, delivering, and practice. And I hope that really helps you. And Kelly is going to be sharing the materials as she chatted to make sure that you have access to them. Oh, I see there's somebody in the chat here. So let's just see this quickly. Oops. I'll lean into creating a course that empowers speakers, coaches, and advocates looking for, oops, sorry guys. Empowerment and jelly level communications and inspiration by reaching people in their own framework of the world so they hear what you want them to, not what the preceptions are hearing. Sounds good, Greg. Good luck with your with your work on that. This is how you can stay in touch with me. That's my email at Beacon North Strategies. On Twitter, I am myself. On Instagram, I am the podcast. And my website is there as well. If you do this kind of work and you need help, that's something that I can support you with in terms of the podcast and blog. If that's something you're interested in, I do have a website, or you can just search Women Don't Do That wherever you listen to podcasts. Oh, we have a few more comments here. Raz says, preach it. Oh, Laura says, perfect timing. Just confirmed a meeting with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Global Affairs. Oh, that's fantastic, Laura. Good luck. That sounds like fun. That's my idea of a good time. Okay, so that's my contact info. If you want to be in touch online or something, feel free to stay connected. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's always fun to chat through some of these things and share some of my knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone wants to save the chat, the little 3 dots at the bottom are going to give you the option to save it, and that'll just pull that all into your computer so you can have those files and conversation that we had today. And also we will be publishing the replay on entrepreneurschool.ca. And there you will also soon find the remaining workshops that are going to be taking place this year. We do have one on November 16th, which normally would be up there, but we are just reworking it with the host. And then I'm going to now make an official commitment that I will be hosting the last 2 workshops of the year. So the November 30th and December 14th, which will be all focused on vision planning and goal setting for 2023, because I am a big fan and believer of doing that before the holidays, before you forget
Good
everything
call,
that happened
Kelly.
in the last year. At least starting it, and then I like to go away on a little trip with myself to a cabin in the woods and then really map it out. But I like to, I have a process that I've been using now for the last few years in my business to help reflect and then plan and goal set and think about what the next year is going to look like. And also it helps to just get really excited about kind of that, new year feeling. So those will be coming up. So stay tuned for information on how to be part of those as well. And really thank you all for your engagement and for being here today. And thank you, Stephanie, for tuning in from Ottawa and sharing all of this really actually important information. So if you liked this workshop today, please share it with someone when the replay is out and let other people know about Entrepreneur School, because we are hosting these events and sharing information and resources from different experts in a variety of fields that have to do with, helping you grow your business in different ways. So there's also a big vault of other information and other workshops that we've been hosting since the spring. So lots of resources for you to check out. Have a good day, everybody.